This is the largest MacBook ever made by Apple, the 17-inch MacBook Pro. It was discontinued in 2012 because of dwindling sales figures and the disastrous release of the previous year's model. It's a pretty simple story, and the biggest sold since is the 16-inch Pro, which is still sold by Apple and remains a popular computer. The story of the smallest ever MacBook is a bit more complicated though. Right now, you can buy a 13-inch MacBook Air from Apple, but to get anything smaller, you'd need to buy an iPad. Whether that's a choice made by Apple to boost iPad sales is up for debate, really. But Apple can and have made smaller MacBooks. In 2015, they released the 12-inch MacBook with a Retina display. As you can see, it's astounding how small this thing is compared to most other laptops. At just 13mm thick, it was thinner than the original iPad. These 12-inch MacBooks were designed right as Apple were entering their thinness era. They seem to be chasing smaller and smaller products year on year. The size of this machine was pretty limiting in terms of power though. 12-inch MacBooks had ultra-low power chips known as the Intel M series inside. They drew less than 10 watts of power and were designed to run cool and quiet inside laptops like this with smaller batteries and no internal fans. So no one was going to be using these for editing professional grade video, but their size was unlike anything we've seen since. Going back even further though, Apple released something even smaller in 2010. This is the 11-inch MacBook Air, with the smallest display on any MacBook ever sold by Apple. It's a bit of a challenge trying to see anything on this tiny screen, but in terms of portability, I'd say it doesn't get much better. Despite the small form factor, there's a full-size QWERTY keyboard on board. This is a pre-butterfly switch keyboard as well, so it's absolutely lovely to type on. I think the most surprising thing about this laptop though is the specs it manages to run in spite of its small footprint. These 11-inch MacBook Airs came with multiple CPU options. The base level CPU is an Intel i5, while this upgraded model has an Intel i7, specifically the 2677M, since it's a 2011 model. It's unfortunately only a dual-core processor, but the clock speed is pretty flexible. It starts at 1.8 GHz and can boost up to 2.9. As is the case with a lot of earlier i5s and i7s, this chip has held up pretty well over the years. It's still able to run macOS High Sierra fine, and I can guarantee you macOS Monterey from 2021 will run just fine too using the OpenCore Legacy patcher. 2011 MacBooks don't have native support to run modern macOS versions straight off the App Store, but OCLP lets you patch pretty much any version from the last 5 years straight onto older computers like these. I've not actually got around to doing it on this one yet, but for proof of concept, here's my 2009 plastic MacBook running Monterey without any slowdowns. That thing runs an Intel Core 2 Duo processor. So you can also get up to 8GB of RAM in these. I've got a 4GB 2011 model here, so it is just 1600 MHz DDR3 memory, but 4 or 8GB is a good amount for most tasks on macOS, especially on a laptop of this age. In fact, my 8GB MacBook Air from 2020 edited every video on this channel until a couple of months ago. As is the case with most small laptops, the graphics chip isn't at all impressive on the 11-inch MacBook Air. This one has an Intel HD 3000 inside. The HD 3000 is what's known as an iGPU, meaning it shares memory with the rest of the system and is actually located on the CPU itself. So when needed, this Mac uses up to a gigabyte of its RAM for graphics purposes. This machine won't be able to run any particularly new or demanding games, and it's fair to say any sort of 3D design apps will run very slowly. This computer wasn't built to be a graphics powerhouse though. None of the MacBook Airs were. I mean, the 11 and 13-inch MacBook Airs have the same graphics chips inside. That's something I find quite impressive actually. There's a considerable size difference between the two of these machines, yet for the most part the components inside are the same. Apple could have omitted the i7 option from the very tiniest MacBook Air, but they kept the options uniform across the lineup. That makes these computers very impressive for the time, but more to the point, it means they're still very usable for most people. Around the time this computer was made, most people used laptops with HDDs inside them. Slow, spinning disk drives that were noticeably far slower than anything solid state. And you guessed it, these little computers have all solid state drives inside them. SSDs are up to 12 times faster than your average HDD and have become the norm for all kinds of computers these days. The SSD inside this 2011 MacBook Air still runs on the SATA interface, meaning it's not up to PCIe Express speeds found inside the latest MacBooks, but there's more than enough speed here to run very modern operating systems with super fast boot times. SSD storage also means basic functions within the OS run very smoothly, like browsing the internet, moving files between different folders, and opening up new windows. At 256GB, the storage inside isn't huge. It was possible to get 11-inch MacBook Airs with SSDs going all the way up to 512GB, but like I said, most people didn't have a reason to equip their MacBook Air with anything like that back then, so it's very rare to actually find a 512GB model anywhere in the wild. Despite all of these fairly impressive specs that have held up well, there's a glaring issue right in front of us. I mean, there's glare all over it. I'm talking of course about the 11.6-inch display on this MacBook Air. It's hard to see many positives about it, really. The resolution is completely atrocious when compared to virtually any other phone, laptop or tablet released over the last decade or so. It's a 1366 by 768 glossy TFT panel, which effectively means this is a 720p laptop. I mean, in 2011 you'd be pretty disappointed to have to look at this every day, but they sold these until 2016, a time when the most powerful 15-inch MacBooks had 2880 by 1800 displays. That's almost 2.5 times the resolution this thing has. Unfortunately, it's difficult to see this thing from any other angle, and I mean that literally. The viewing angles are tight, and you wouldn't want to watch a film on this thing from a distance. It almost feels like you have to be in the exact right place to see what Apple intended when designing this computer. There are also ostensibly huge bezels. It's quite jarring to have such a thick silver frame imprisoning the already subpar display from all four corners. I understand that corners have to be cut in order to glean profit from somewhere, but these bezels simply had to go. The display is something laptop users are looking at from the moment they open their device. One other issue I have with the panel attached to this thing is its hinges. I've owned two 11-inch MacBook Airs in the past, and they've both had kind of loose hinges. It feels too easy to open and close this laptop. I'm assuming it's a factory thing since neither of the people I bought my two computers from mentioned the loose hinges. But yeah, it does contribute to a feeling that these aren't the most hard-wearing of MacBooks. The 13-inch MacBook Airs I've tested have felt a lot more sturdy to open and close, so it could just be that there's less surface area to work with considering all the relatively high-end parts within this smaller variant. Aside from my gripes regarding the top of this computer, the bottom half is pretty sensibly laid out, and it does what it says on the tin. I mentioned this keyboard feels good to use as it's got a good amount of travel. The glass trackpad is an equally pleasant experience. MacBooks were pretty ahead of the curve when this laptop released, as a lot of Windows laptops had trackpads half the size and many weren't yet multi-touch compatible. This trackpad isn't enormous, but the laptop's size is more to blame for that, really. So that's the 11-inch MacBook Air in 2025. If you're looking to buy one of these right now, I have to stress that they don't vary much based on their year of production. This 2011 model isn't a long way behind the final ones sold in 2016 in terms of performance. And if you're buying used, people tend to jack up the price of a Mac if it was built in the last decade or so just because it sounds newer and therefore better. Would I still use one of these every day? No. But it's an interesting size, far from anything Apple sells right now. And it's still a perfectly usable computer for a bit of YouTube and browsing the web. Thank you very much for watching. If you're into older computing like this, or Macs in general, subscribe for more of the same every single week. We have a Discord server too, which is active pretty much 24/7, and it's a great place to discuss older hardware. This is quite a niche channel, as you probably noticed, so I'm unlikely to go hugely viral anytime soon. Because of this, your support on Patreon is hugely appreciated. It's a great way to support my work if you have the means.